Hi, everybody. Celia Waterhouse here. Thank you for joining us at OnPoint Mentors. I appreciate you taking the time out to spend this hour with us. Today, we have a special OnPoint mentor, Tania Tuck, and her topic today is top tips for handling the tough stuff. Tania is an emotional wellness specialist and a coach, a teacher, and an author, particularly in managing the trauma-stemming emotions, reframing events, and finding new meanings, and transforming perceptions. Welcome, Tania.
Hey, thank you, Celia.
That was a mouthful saying all that.
There's a lot going on in this house.
Well, the tough stuff was even just introducing you.
Yeah, right. I know. Sorry about that.
So it's a great topic, the top tips for handling the tough stuff. So it begs the question, what's tough? What's considered tough stuff?
Well, thanks for the question. I do, there's quite a lot of languages you can see in Facebook and other things about trauma and there's trauma and mind-based stuff. So to me, the tough stuff is the things that have happened to you in your life when you were younger, that was either an event, meaning that it was a one-off thing, like your parents got divorced or something like that, or as an experience. For example, there was incest, or these are big, tough events that I can see that happen. But it might be something that's happening today. Life is difficult. You don't have enough money, or you've lost your job, or something like that. So it can be something in the past or something right now. But the things that they have in common is that they stay in your present time consciousness. You can't sort of forget them. They kind of stick with you, right? And the other thing is that you kind of have strong emotions about them. So when you consider this one thing, it gets you can feel it in your body. You're kind of getting riled up or angry or sad, or you don't feel like you have much control. Because even though something has happened a long time ago, if we haven't dealt with it properly, then it will be coming back again and playing a part in our lives and our choices that we make as adults. So
does everybody get the same quantity and quality of tough stuff? I mean, or do some people get more than others?
It seems like that sometimes, doesn't it? I mean, you can see people that are sort of seemingly getting getting hit from all angles, and it's really, really difficult for them. And, they just don't seem to be getting out of just the coping mode of getting through a day, let alone through a week, and so on. And then you see other people just swanning around, as you imagine a swan, just gliding through their lives. And do they get as much tough stuff? Well, on the face of it, it doesn't look the same. But actually, what it is that we all get tough stuff happening to us, which, is another word for a challenge. And we get these things happen for a reason. And each one of us is on such a unique journey that I believe that we all get the challenges in the areas of our relationships, or how we feel about our identity, or in our career and what we need to learn and to be of service to the world with. And then in our health, if we get our tough stuff happening in one area, it's really because that's where we need to have our learning. That's what I see it as. So the great thing, I know that I work with universal laws, right, Celia?
Yes.
And one of the big things about the universal laws that run our lives, one of them, the law of equilibrium, states you can't have a positive without a negative. And that means that when we have the tough stuff, we've also got good stuff happening. So if this is challenge, this is support, and they're happening in equal measure. We just don't necessarily recognize that because we haven't brought our awareness to it. So I do know that each of us gets as much support and challenge, but we might not notice it in one person just because it's not in the area that we would recognize.
So let's go back to universal laws, because some people may not really understand what that means. Can you explain a little bit about what universal laws is? Or
yeah, I mean, so I absolutely love universal laws. There's many of them. And what the universal part means is that this law applies to every layer and strata, from the skies down to the very smallest thing that we can see, which is a photon of light, actually. And in the middle of that, there is still the laws at play. For example, if we have the law of polarity in the middle of a cell, you'll find a positive and negative part in equal measure in the center there. And in a photon of light, the smallest thing that we know of, there's the same setup. So this applies to the tiniest thing and the biggest thing and us in between. And I think that when you do look at your life and you do look at these things existing, it helps. It takes a huge amount of stress off your plate, because you stop thinking that you're the creator of everything that's happening. You realize that there is a co-creation going on, and you're not in charge of everything. And but you're here for a purpose. And so the kind of things that the three ones that I use most when I have my clients is the fact that there is the law of polarity, meaning that you have a positive and negative in equal together. They're attached. You can't have one without the other. You can't split them. And then I have the law of equilibrium, where I like to think of a seesaw, and that they're balanced, and there's a cantilever in the middle and a bar with the two sides. They're literally balanced like a seesaw. So you can't have more happiness than sadness. You have, in any event, there will be both sides. And then the third thing, of course, is that it's conserved, meaning that there's a bubble around it. You're not going to lose it or gain anything. It's going to be conserved. And I have an example of that was when I was a teacher in London, and we had the water board had come in to talk to the kids about not doing their teeth and not wasting water and things, because they said that within the atmosphere, the world has a consistent amount of water. It's just in different forms, and it's in different. It's drought over here, and it's flooding over here, and it's ice and glacier over here, and it's a flood of water over here, but it's always conserved. So you don't ever lose the amount of water, which is very interesting, really, when we think about it. We always think we're losing it and it's not coming back. No, it's just in abundance somewhere else. So those three together are really very powerful way to look at particular events that have happened. Because usually when we remember an event, we have some tough stuff. We have firstly activated a part of our brain it gets to do with our survival, the limbic area of our brain. And what we'll be doing in that moment is shutting down certain things. So we won't necessarily remember this event, except for being in a very closed visual area. We won't be able to rationalize and analyze it, because we'll have gone back away from that part of our brain. And so the things that stick in our memory are very related to our sensory experience that we had in that moment. And it will not be balanced. We will be remembering a particular angle on it, because if it was balanced emotionally, we wouldn't have it as a recurring pattern in our brain.
Wow. So, okay, let's go back to, childhood trauma and memories that are unpleasant. So, I guess in modern words, we call it baggage, I've got baggage, right? Mm-hmm. And people carry the baggage sometimes to their deathbeds, right? So what is your process for taking someone through so that they can shed the baggage, feel lighter, instead of, and another question, which some people might ask is, can you avoid Can you avoid it? Can
you avoid having the tough stuff? I mean, you do see that some people, it does feel like sometimes when you're really challenged, you can see that you don't think it's the same for anyone else. Well, firstly, as I said before, it's not meant to, because you've got your own unique journey. However, I think it's very important to think about how you have got where you've got to. So when you are looking to see, I've got a challenge right now, this is the learning and growth you need for your soul's journey to go on to the next big part of your reason for being here, your vision or your purpose. And sometimes when we get that challenge, it's because we need a course correct, or we are not paying attention to the universal law. The universe is saying, come on now, you're going this way. And then you're going, come on now, you're going this way. And it's sort of like giving you big, ever greater warnings, I suppose, that you are off track or off purpose. And When you get the big ones like a car accident or near-death experience or something, that's a massive wake-up call to reassess your life, to rethink about things. So when you see someone and you don't think they get challenged at all, firstly, you're not noticing that necessarily where their challenge is.
Yeah.
But secondly, they're not necessarily as enlightened. And I'm saying that with the greatest respect for that everybody exists on the planet. But sometimes the challenged person, the person with the tough stuff, says, why me? Why do I have to have this happen to me? But I like to share with them that really it's in the challenge that you get to shape your destiny. It's in the challenge that you get to see your best self, or even awaken yourself to who you are and why you're here. And so if you don't actually get to have those challenges, you don't necessarily awaken yourself to who you are. And so the challenged people tend to have a more interesting world, interesting life. They're on an edge. They're certainly awake. They're not being a sheep. Like there's, we sometimes look around and you could say, "Oh, you're a sheep. You don't. You're just doing whatever's there," So I like to say that, hey, if you're getting some challenges, it's because you're here for a reason, and that's a good thing. You don't want to avoid it. You won't be able to avoid it, but you can turn it around and think, wow, this is helping me grow. Wow, I'm a different person. I'm hanging out with a different crowd. You're really making changes because of the challenge.
So walk me through your process. So someone comes into your office and they've had some massive trauma happen. They've carrying that memory around. They can't seem to shed it. Everything in their life is affected by this memory or this incident that happened years ago. Where do you start? How do you find specifically what are they there for? What do they want to clear? Walk me through your process.
Okay, well, thank you. So obviously every session, every client starts with a discovery session where we get to the heart of what's going on in their lives. We look at the rich model, relationship, identity, career, and health, and the intersection of those, and where they are or feel they are now, and where they would love to be. And specifically, if there has been a particular event or something that's in one area, then we'll definitely be starting with that. But it's good to get the context of, well, this is also happening, and I'm not very well, and because that really, that could be playing a huge part in their levels of stress and how they're doing. So we're taking a snapshot really of where they're at and their outcomes they would like from coaching. So then, say for example, we come to a particular event. Now, I know that sometimes people want to stop drinking or something general, but there's a reason why they were drinking in the beginning. So let's get to the source of it. Let's get to what was the thing that happened or you experienced that gave you this desire to escape, to have a drink or to take drugs or to even to go shopping. And anyone with an addictive piece, there's usually something they're escaping, right? And so you got to get there.
And how do you focus people to get there? Because a lot of people blank out, right? And they say, I don't know. I don't know. What's your magic ninja trick for getting people to the specific?
It's firstly about telling a story. I think that, when you can actually tell your story and piece it together, you can actually get to the heart of, well, actually, gosh, you know what? My first drink was when I was 10. And, and then you can go, so what was going on when you were 10? And you just literally sort of opening up the jigsaw puzzle that's in your head, that some of it is very current because you've got stress and strains and memories that you haven't resolved. And then other parts just in your autobiographical timeline because you don't have any charges against those things. So, but I do think that getting to the source is being able to just trace it back from where you are to, just those key moments where you had a disappointment or, something happened that was just you deemed terrible. And then you started drinking. I know someone who found out he could not have a child. And so he started drinking. That was the beginning of it. Now, afterwards, it became a sort of a confidence thing and whatever. But in the beginning, that was the source. And so once you've got to the source, and like, for example, so say you've been out to a wedding and you're going there with all the anticipation of being with your boyfriend and showing off, you're looking your best and everything like that. So this would be naming the specific event. So let's say we're at a wedding, and I'm with my boyfriend. I'm wearing a lovely outfit, and then you say, okay, so what are the feelings that I'm feeling from this event that's happened? Oh, well, I actually feel disappointed. I feel let down. I feel criticized, and so on. Why? Well, he compared me to other women at the wedding, and I didn't feel very comfortable, and I didn't feel very worthy, right? So you're going from naming the event to what were the emotions, and then why did you feel those emotions? So you're really getting to the specific things. He didn't pay attention to me, or he criticized me by comparing me to the woman in red, that kind of piece. You're getting very clear. And then you're going, okay, so what did you think was going to happen? What did you think was going to happen? Well, I actually thought he would be very sweet to me, and I thought that he would compliment me, and I thought that we would get back together because he would think I'm so lovely, and this would be a beautiful thing. And so what we realize is that when we have something we perceive to be very challenging, in your mind, you have it's sort of the opposite of what's happening, the reality, as a kind of fantasy in your mind of it should work like this. I'll turn up, I'll be all gorgeous, and he's going to compliment me, and we're going to have a great time with his friends, and then we're going to get back together properly this time, and it's all going to be amazing. And so your disappointment and the level of your anger comes when you realize that that's not happening. He's not actually being very nice to me or you in this example. He's not being very nice. He's actually not paying enough attention. He's not seeing you. So when you actually can see the real content of it, you can see that it's actually got its opposite in your mind, that you wished it would have happened.
So then how do you, okay, you called it a fantasy. When reality's down here and it's not what you expected. So then what happens? So now you're kind of unbalanced.
So this is a great question, actually, because I believe it's all about perception. Yeah. And it's all about the meaning that you give to the event itself. So in this case, what I like, once we've got the content of the reality of what was just made it so terrible, is that we then check in with what would our emotion score be if 1 was integrated and 15 was suicidal. If we had this scale where you really it's full on going from totally feeling integrated and centered in yourself and at one with the universe and everything, very, very grounded, to being spun off and just feeling terrible, where would you be? And so when you have a flash of the emotion, when you're in the moment, you could be a 9 or a 10 or 11. I mean, you could be getting up there. And so it's about being able to just assess, oh, I would be a 9. And that's okay. It doesn't matter if you're a 9. It's just about being able to become aware where you are. And then we know the strength, because of the law of equilibrium, we know that the strength of the fantasy is the same. So we know that that's basically, there's some strong fantasy elements here that it would have been much better if he had been, paying me compliments and so on, because I've got this reality here which is not meeting things. So what we do is we then look to find the opposite in the event. So for all of those feelings and all of those experiences that the person has come up with as the reasons why they felt that way, we look for the benefits to them. And sometimes it can be really difficult because they go, well, there aren't any benefits. But really, actually, what came up and what can come up in this scenario would be the way that you feel about yourself. There's some self-reliance. You're not looking outside of yourself for compliments to feel good about yourself, because you did know you looked good. You did know it was you were okay. And so it kind of gives you that confidence again. And once you've found as you know, a substantial amount, maybe 10 to 15 different answers for why you felt those ways, you check in again. Are you still at a 9? And the chances are you're not. You're probably a 7 or a 6. So then we cross over to the other side and we look at the fantasy of all the things you wished had happened, that we'd been playing with the friends and having fun at the wedding and feeling like we want to get back together properly and all of that kind of stuff. And then you realize that actually the drawbacks of that would have been, well, he's not really seeing you for who you really are. He's not being very nice to you. You might get him back, but not like this. You've got criteria kind of thing. So we find all of the benefits there. And then this line, just they jump into the middle where we are one and integrated. And we can see that, that basically the event wasn't just a difficult, tough stuff event. It actually had lessons and learning and benefits to the person and so on. So it ends up that they, at that moment, start to feel much more open-minded about the event. They actually can see, oh gosh, it really did serve me as much as it challenged me. And there's this sort of release, stress-free moment where you're just sitting there going, wow, I'm okay. And when you think about the event, there's no emotion attached anymore. And it's just a lovely thing that you can say, okay, I've cleared this one out.
Wow, you make it sound so simple. Okay, I've got a couple questions regarding the numbers. Why 15? Why 1 to 15? And then is our goal to always try to be at 1?
Oh, great questions. You know what? So I am developing this process. It's called the Emotion Regulator. And I started it in February when COVID started and everyone was thinking about, what could they do to help society kind of thing. Because as much as there's been some divisiveness, there have been actually some lovely things coming up where people are being charitable to their communities. But what I have is this part of a process based in or referencing the ratio of perception work that John DeMartini does. And in that, in the work of, when he talks about ratio of perception, for his model, he decided that 1 to 1 is in the middle. Then there is a 1 to 7, 7 to 1 ratio where you are able to manage yourself. And then anything beyond that gets increasingly more polarized. And then when you get to 15 to 1 and above, you will be considering suicide. I know a lot of people who do. And I think perhaps all of us at some point or another might have that moment. So I don't think we need to judge people whether they're here or here, but certainly it's where depression lives. It's where people who are very sort of anxious and feel a victim of life, they will be living out here in this area. Obviously, it's just a model. And one of the things I love about it is that the way I've made this, I have a bubble in the middle, which is your bubble of self-regulation. And it's this 1 to 7, 7 to 1 ratio. And in there, you're feeling a degree of happy and you're feeling a degree of sad, but you aren't, you're able to control your emotions. You don't need to reach for a cigarette or a drink or go shopping or sex or whatever the addiction is, or you don't have to leave or try and minimize yourself and you don't have to do anything like that. But it's also very connected to regulation, because one of the other pieces when you have tough stuff is to learn how to regulate your body. When we are out of regulation, I would say that that's beyond 7 to 1 and 1 to 7. And what happens there is that we aren't living in our highest level of consciousness. We're much more in survival mode. And because as we go increasingly away from the center, we're actually getting more and more polarized. And so we start to become more paranoid and, or manic on the positive side, or depressed on the negative side. And we're literally finding ourselves feeling like we're an island away from anyone else. We don't have any safety or security, and nothing, we can't trust anyone. All of those kind of feelings come up in this, the further you go out from the middle.
So you talk about the ratios, 1 to 7, 1 to
Mm-hmm.
5, 1 to whatever. So are you saying like one, tell me more about the ratios. What are you comparing?
Okay, well, that's a really good point. So next time we'll do this with a picture. But the idea is that, going to the right, which is obviously, I think I'm back to front here, but this is my right. And going to the right is the positive getting ever increasingly positive. So imagine right in the middle is the positive and negative in equal measure. And then you have, I'm going to see if I can use my shirt here. If you have one leap, right? So now I'm leaping in the right way towards happy, happy, happy. And so I am now 2 times happier than I am sad. And then I'm 3 times and then 4 times happier than I am sad. And if I had to go back to the middle and then this one was to come out, I'm now 1 jump, I'm 2 times sadder than I am happy. Then I'm 3 times sadder, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. So 7 times. This is a reasonable amount of distress.
Right.
But because I'm just working with those numbers because they work on quite a few different levels. But I like the scale to be within the range that you can manage. We're not going into hundreds and things. I think it's really important that it's, I think John's right, that if you actually think about the magnitude of 15 to 1, 15 times sadder than you are happy, well, you can see how death would be something you'd be interested in. And whereas 7, you can feel the quantity. If you're thinking about 7 times more sadness, you can see that, well, 6, 5, 4, I can manage myself in here. But it's when it gets to 8, 9, 10, I need something outside of myself to help moderate my behavior and help get me back into feeling like I'm in the bubble.
So when you say outside of yourself, are you talking about when they grab a drink or a cigarette or something more? Or?
Yes. Risk taking is another thing. One of the things that happens when we get to be living mostly in a sort of survival mode because we haven't been able to regulate our lives very well and we've had a lot of stuff going on in there. When we have the tough stuff, it basically we're alert in that moment. We're looking for how safe we are, and we're thinking there might be dangers. So the fact is that those dangers are not necessarily there. So we need to know about our cortisol levels, and we need to know how to manage ourselves to be able to bring that down. So being able to use breath, where you can actually, your oxygen levels in your lungs actually reduces the need for the signals for the cortisol. And so you can actually really calm yourself down just by breathing. So knowing how to regulate yourself and how to look after yourself and how much sleep you need and what kind of foods you're eating that might be interfering with your mood and how you are, those kind of things are really important to check on. Because when you're out in that area, you're going to take more risks, you're going to do escaping style activities, and you're going to lean on things outside of yourself to find your own sense of purpose and meaning. And that's never a good thing. I mean, it will work for some people for some time, but it's exhausting because you never know. You're always never in control because it's up to that person to be the right person for you,
Yeah.
And so in the end, we all need to have, I don't want anyone to be an island of one, for sure. It's very important to be a part of a community, just because here we are in in a world which feels very uncomfortable for some people right now.
Right.
But each one of us needs to find our unique set of friends and our family and the people that we resonate with, so that because they're definitely there. And I think that when we feel that we are having tough stuff and we are finding it tricky, if we actually go and help someone else with their tough stuff, it can feel really great. And it also opens us up to the idea that we can also accept help or advice or something like that.
So is there any practical way of finding out what number you're at, or certain questions, or is it a gut feeling thing?
Well, you know what? That's the really good part of this, because there's so many models out there where we all fill out the questions and then we're told we're the number, right? I mean, I actually really like these things, but I do know that when you are actually checking in with yourself and you're resonating, what number do I feel? And remember that you're going to the moment. So you're going to the very event, what happened and what it made you feel and why it made you feel that way. And then you're going to, in that moment, go, well, how do I feel? And you can feel the rage just flares up or anxiety or fear or something. And when you're in that, you can say, oh gosh, you know what? If 1 was integrated and 15 is suicidal and I would consider killing myself, where would I be? And knowing that 7 to 1, you're regulating yourself, you're okay. If you know you're not okay, you're going to be between a 7 and a 15. And the thing is that this is only a perception. So there isn't a right or wrong. You can't get it wrong. And so once you've chosen the number because it feels, gosh, you know what? I wouldn't be a 7, but I wouldn't be an 8 either. I'm going to be a 9. So you put your marker there. But when you've looked at the other side of it, you will just check in again and you really won't feel the same number. You will feel, you know what? I'm a 5. And it's the great thing is that I put the power with you to decide rather than having me decide what you are, which in the end, that just takes away your power. So I like very much that the client is beginning to learn and assess and get into their own body about what are they feeling and why are they feeling it? Because when something's very generic, oh, I had a terrible childhood. Well, what happened? Oh, I don't know. You can't work with it. You can't, because it doesn't mean anything. And getting to the, peeling back the layers and getting to those source moments really helps, because once you've cleared those out, there's a whole new sort of swathe of energy that you get that, you've shared sort of feelings of shame or guilt that you've been sitting underneath for ages. And, I had one client say, after she'd worked with me, she says, I now have sonic boom power, meaning that She could do anything. She felt she could do anything, but it's a journey. It's a journey.
So your background was inner city school teacher for 20 years in London.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have seen a lot of things that the kids were going through. Can you talk a little bit about that time?
Yeah, I certainly can, because I was in London and Oxford as well, but mainly London for a long time. And when you start teaching, you have all these high ideals about what you're going to educate and do all these things. And then you get to the reality of their lives. And my very, very first class in London, in Fulham, the very next year was split. There was 4 teaching assistants given to them. There was 5 kids that were sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And I'd had them for an entire year by myself. So, I saw an awful lot of kids going through a lot of tough stuff, from anything from, having certain physical abuse happening to one poor little kid from China whose family came from China. He was a refugee and he had arrived, and then someone in China went and was about to die. So his parents left him with a foster family. And when I got to see him, he was mute. He had stopped speaking and he hadn't spoken for a year. Because he was so traumatized by his parents leaving, having just arrived, through the journey of being a refugee. Anyway, so, there were, on that level, there was always these, I love working with kids who've got this level of trauma. And what I ended up doing was becoming an advanced skills teacher in ethnic minority achievement. Because what I ended up finding is that I was drawn to the kids that are had emotional behavioral difficulties and or had these big stories from going from one country to another. I worked in one class in White City, and there were 27 kids and 18 different languages in one class.
Wow.
So we're talking about, kids that have seen too much, heard too much, don't speak the language, and so on. So I used to be for a specific school, I would be onboarding all of those kids and their families and setting up the school so the teachers could really handle the stresses that they had. But I feel that, all of those problems that those kids had were things that happened that I now meet you again when you're now an adult. If we're still plagued by the things that happened when we were younger, I'm just seeing it at an older age. But I'm pretty sure I'll have seen you in my class, each person that I meet. I've met you before as a child.
So that begs an interesting discussion on what can we do. I mean, I don't know if you were coaching back then, but what can we do at that young age for these children, for the kids or the young adults, depending on where you are in your school years? What can we do to help them, shed the baggage before they actually, hit the real world and they have to survive on their own and make a living and have a family? And, what are some of those strategies, I don't know, that we can think about?
So I think it's really interesting to think about the brain development and when we get the baggage, because under 3, we're not going to have any conscious memory, or even 4, between 3 and 4, we start to get our memory comes online where we actually have a conscious memory. Before that, we don't even know. Yet 80% of the wiring of the brain will have been done. So we know that whatever happened in those very early years will have created the templates in the brain as to how we think the world is like, or how we feel we fit. And so, but you won't have, that's going to be in your unconscious. You're not going to know what those markers were. So then you get to have other things happen. Like, for example, when you're very, very young, you believe you're the center of the universe. I mean, like, you have to be, because you are in your parents are completely in charge of your survival. If they don't do their job well, you're not going to survive. You're totally dependent. So you have to think of yourself as the center of the universe. Well, I think when we get to around 3 or 4, we realize that mommy is a separate person. I mean, they've already kind of got there, but they actually recognize that mommy's life does not revolve around me. And hey, I've even got a little sister or brother, or, so suddenly there's a bit of a crisis. And, suddenly we can get very upset with the world because we don't quite know our place in it. Now we realize there's lots of universes. There's not just mine, and everyone's part of my world. And I think that when that baggage hits, our brain is still developing to the point where it becomes an intrinsic thing that we wouldn't necessarily be able to handle through speaking. And, drawing pictures or doing something practical can really help for kids. And then as they get older, they can look back on these events just like an adult, but they're actually quite... I mean, I worked with a 7-year-old who'd had quite an interesting life, and of being on the road with his mum. His mum had sort of gone off in a car, and they spent 2 years in their car driving around and doing stuff. And but he didn't know where he was getting his next meal. He was constantly hungry, and so it's really interesting because to map his world, to see his challenges, to teach him how to be a courageous person as a result of what's happened to him. We talked about being a superhero and what was his superpower and what would he do with it as a result of all the things that he knew. So I've actually done that with an 11-year-old who was suicidal, and it tends to be that when they're in that middle age, trying to abstract and think of a hero that they could create that's them outside of themselves helps them see that they can do good things in the world, especially if they're finding school tough. How can I use my force for good kind of thing? What can I do in school that would actually help me get along with the teachers rather than having a hard time and all of that kind of stuff?
What about the opposite? The helicopter moms, over nurturing, that can cause its own issues as well for the kids.
Absolutely, because in the end, if you don't work it out for yourself, guess what you get? A bully. In the end, if you have over-supportive people in your life, you are going to have its equal and opposite turning up. So there's going to be someone, a teacher, another pupil, or an older child, or a cousin. Someone's going to come in your life, maybe even a parent figure, who's going to balance that out. So I suppose if we're talking about for the parents who think about being helicopter parents, because I know it's very hard to let go, it's about learning that they've got their own journey, and some of it's not going to be comfortable. I worked in a school, obviously, as you know, and my kids were in the same school. And one year, my daughter was going into a class with a teacher that I particularly had a difficult time with myself. And I was like, oh my God, she's going to have such a hard time. And I just thought, you know what, this is learning life. You know, this is understanding that you're not going to always have easy times. And you know, I had to think about all the skills she was going to get by having to negotiate having a tricky teacher. It wasn't necessarily, you know, going to be a positive influence in her world. It's going to be one of those toughies that you remember, you know.
So did she have a difficult year?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I was checking in. I mean, I was very fortunate to be on both ends of, you know, I can check in with other teachers, how she's doing, all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I suppose you know what I was doing as helicoptering. I was being my own. I was there, but sort of as a stealth bomber, you know, like I was just waiting to see if I needed to step in. But in the end, I didn't, and there was nothing too bad. She had some good friends in that class, like three of them that hung together, so she was good. But I did, you know, ultimately I would have wanted to have had a lovely, caring, cuddly teacher, not a spiky, difficult one that I know is going to challenge. And I've seen a lot of people, as you do in coaching, as you do in teaching, where some people who are there in the role of the authority are not there for the right reasons. They're sorting their own sort of backstory out through disciplining children, and you know, and that's unfortunately the way of the world. And so in the end, I see it as that, you know, you are getting training and you're getting a learning experience, but it's not necessarily the one that, you know, it's not the algebra or whatever that you thought you were going to learn. It's something else. It's about how to handle difficult people.
So that brings me back. You know, you and I have coached in the same room multiple times, and what we see repeatedly over and over is someone's always saying, "Oh, I was abandoned by my father," or "My mother didn't love me enough." And you know, you're talking to grown men or grown women, you know, that might be in their 60s, and they're still talking about how their parent or parents did not care about them, and that comes up over and over and over again. And so, what is your approach to those issues, that tough issue that people have been carrying this baggage for decades?
Well, they are meant to be our biggest challenges, I suppose. I mean, if you think about it, that the story goes that we are the child is the disowned parts of the parent, right? So it continues your growth, that your primary most learning and growth comes from your intimate relationship. And so the next closest thing where you're going to learn from is your children. And so the dynamic between a mother and a father and their children is a primal event, you know, where, because as the baby is coming out, obviously it's surrounded by the ethics and morals and the belief systems of those parents. And for better or worse, they get injected into a kind of group or society which might have a religious aspect, or might be very strict, or might have really laid back, you know, hippie style lifestyle, no food in the fridge, who cares, let's just have fun, you know, that kind of thing. And there isn't a right or wrong. We get the exact parents we need. And so I know that when we are, you know, there's a moment in our lives when we look at our parents and we go, wow, you're just another person trying to work it out. Before then, you know, we might have them on a pedestal or think they're amazing. And because when we're kids, they are pretty godlike. I mean, if they don't do what they're meant to do, we're dead. So, hey, keep going, you know. But I do think that the relationship with parents is an extraordinary one, and it affects pretty much every relationship going forward in one way or another. And there's lots of different ways that you can look at that. But specifically, children try to look at solving the things they couldn't solve when they were a kid when they're an adult with a new person. Because say dad was an alcoholic and you couldn't stop him drinking, and then you meet someone who's an alcoholic and that's your mission. Well, you're maybe doing it because you wish you could have stopped dad doing it. And so now you're kind of acting out the thing that you didn't have the capacity to complete when you were a kid. So there's so much juice about it, and we can get still so charged by these two individuals or more, stepmothers particularly, or stepfathers, or all these extended families we all now live in. And I think it's so important to be able to just go, okay, what were their characteristics actually? Because I've just got them as the big bad wolf. How can I actually find out who they are really? So it's about becoming a bit more objective and looking at their lives and plotting it out again. I think you can see, wow, and Eckhart Tolle says this, is if you would just put yourself in that person's shoes in that moment, thinking what they think and having the life that they had, you would be exactly the same. You wouldn't change. You wouldn't say, oh, if I had had their life, I would be doing so many better things. No, you would be doing exactly the same, thinking the same way. So there is that to just, take a step back and to try and understand your parents' motivations, knowing that they're human, that they're just a human being with sports and challenges, ups and downs, just trying to work it out. I think that really helps when you can see them like that rather than mummy.
I think that goes back to your thing about the wedding, right? Your story in the very beginning of, if my mother would have been more loving or caring or would have been present more, life would have been this way, which is what you called a fantasy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do. I mean, we have these ideas in our minds that we project what it will be like when. And the reality is that what shows up is what shows up right then and there. And any projection you had was not necessarily going to come true. And that's when we get disappointed. And so I think it's important to just be, more relaxed about things and, have your fantasies are there for a reason, in order to galvanize you, to give you something to move towards, to give you a direction and vision. But if you live there and you think that this is the way the world should be, and then everything else looks terrible, then that's when you get depressed, because you basically are comparing your reality to how you wish it would be.
Yeah.
And that's going to cause you to be depressed, thinking that something's missing when it's not.
Yeah, you see that a lot. Social media, Instagram, Facebook, everyone's seeing the beautiful pictures and, oh, look at the perfect life this person has, which I think it's like a snowball effect, right? It becomes more a larger and larger and larger fantasy for them, saying, wow, if I could be like Jane Doe, or if I could be like John Doe, my life would be perfect. But so how do you stop the snowball?
Well, I think it's about stopping and getting present in you. And when you're present in you, you kind of just literally get back into yourself and regulate, which means that you're actually going to feel your body again. Because when people are very stressed out and they live in a sort of action state, they don't actually remember their bodies are there. They don't feel parts of their bodies. They don't really, they can't connect to them. They can't actually, they would say, think about your tricep or something, they wouldn't know how to make it feel, because they're sort of numbed out to themselves. But then once you've got there, you can actually hey, what's the question? I forgot it.
How do you stop the snowball?
Oh, yeah. So then it's about getting into your own essence of who am I? What do I stand for? What are my benefits? What are my positive attributes? What do I do really well? How do I shine? And that's a really big exercise I do, is how do I shine? How do I show up in relationships and in my career and so on? And what qualities do I bring? And then once you've got that as your foundation, firstly, people are usually very shocked how much they are this positive force for good, or this light, or however they see themselves. And it just makes them smile, because they go, oh, oh, I like myself, and then that's the first sort of step, is to just start getting keen on who you are, and then stopping, turning off notifications, or turning off, don't get that magazine, or don't do things that you're going to compare yourself to an unrealistic thing.
Right.
Firstly, if it's on a page in a magazine, it's two-dimensional. And but it's two-dimensional in the sense that you don't know who that person is. It's all a setup anyway, maybe. Or if it's like for a photograph, this model isn't really this happy wife or whatever she is, and this house really isn't hers. And so your reality is of paying bills, of having leaks in your house, or walls that need to be painted, or whatever it is. You're comparing yourself to a set, or she's a model. She's not a mum who's actually given birth to children. She's not done that yet. And yet you're looking at her body as if she should have it's ridiculous. And at the same time, she hasn't got the stresses of having kids and, not sleeping or whatever else is going on for them. So putting like with like is the first thing. It's like, it's not fair on yourself to judge yourself to other people's supposed standards. And I will say something. I did my own little research, very small research. I mean, like, I just was noticing that sometimes I would know the backstory of how someone is feeling, and it's not very good in reality. They're depressed or upset with someone, or something terrible is happening. But what they put on Facebook is a lovely smiley picture. But I know the equal and opposite is happening in reality. They've had a massive argument, and yet they're putting a picture of a happy family, and so just be aware that if somebody's really putting out some gorgeous pictures, just wonder that they might be really having the equal and opposite experience in their reality.
Okay, that makes me think. What did I just recently post lately? I was out camping. What does that mean? I was out in nature with my dogs.
So I suppose I'm distinguishing the just being able to be authentically you and express whatever's going on. I mean, well, let's face it, when we do put things out, not many of us have the courage to say, I'm feeling terrible today. We only put the positive side of our lives, and maybe that's for good reason. But I do think that people need to stop judging themselves according to what they see other people supposedly doing.
Yeah.
Turn it off. Turn the notifications off. Do not look unless you're curious for a broader reason in how you want to expand what you're doing.
Yeah. So, Tania, I've been in the same, again, we've coached in the same room before, and I've seen you in action, and I've always felt like you have such a nurturing soul. I mean, even just standing next to you, you just feel like, oh, I'm safe, right? What led you to get into coaching? Because you're so fabulous at it. So what were some of the the milestones that led you to want to do coaching?
Thank you for asking that question. Well, if I just go to my teaching, firstly, I will say that, I had great reward helping people, these kids, go through some very tricky things, coming from a war zone and having family members die, and then having your mother lose a baby. And I helped these kids sort of get through the mourning of and the trauma of the experiences that they had. And we sent off a balloon for the baby and all of these things. But so I tend to work very well with people who've got the big stories, for lots of reasons. And one of them, though, is that when I was born, I was relinquished by my birth mother, and then I was adopted. And I was adopted into a happy family and, had a very nice upbringing. But because of the relinquishment, and I believe that this is something that all we know so little about babies. We're getting much more clued in, but certainly in the 60s, nobody thought about how the baby would be responding to this experience, because they were supposedly blank slates. And as it turns out, I think that when you find out that you're adopted, you do have an element of well, I'm very different. I don't belong anywhere. Even though you do, you have this sort of moment of feeling like, well, who am I then? And so you're constantly questioning that kind of thing. or you're shutting it all down. I mean, there's lots of different ways people respond, but I've done a lot of research into this area, and I think it's really each person who's adopted has a kind of different vibe about them. They stand out, and in fact, I have probably 7, 8, or 9 friends of mine over the years that when we find out we're adopted, we just start belonging to this kind of tribe. It's a common experience that we share, but it's actually a taboo experience, because certainly obviously now it's very different, but in the 60s it wasn't a subject you talked about. In the 70s, when I realized more, it was something to be ashamed of. People didn't see it as a good thing. They saw you as some sort of wastrel that had sort of been abandoned, kind of thing. And but my premise is really that all these primal wounds, these things that happened to us when we're young, they are there to teach us. And if we can, I love to transform those supposedly negative things into profound awakenings. And I like to show people these supposedly difficult things that made them feel like a victim of their lives can be overcome. You can shift the perspective in order to be able to become empowered in your life and make choices that are aligned to you. I'm absolutely sure this is possible. So you don't have to have your baggage, drag it to the next part of your life. You can actually, when you're ready, face it and let it go.
I'd love to see, there's so many, I know you work in all areas of life, but I can see a real value in coming up with some hot tips or top tips for giving tools to people, particularly, in the schools or maybe teachers even, on how can we teach these kids while they're still young and their minds are still growing to equilibrate and to see both sides of an event that has happened, so that as they grow older, they can handle more of these challenges.
I was sort of saying that before. I think that the thing that I didn't quite finish was that the brain is still developing till it's 25. It's like, I mean, when we think about our teenage years and all the things we put our body through, it's like, what? How come nobody told me my brain was still developing? But at the same time, that's part of the knock, right? That's the chemical the influences that perhaps we need to awaken us and to take us on this part of the journey, right? So yeah, I think it would be lovely for schools to be more mindful about the child's response. I was a Froebelian trained teacher, and that's very child-centered, and I don't see another way. I don't see rote learning or teacher-led education system being very effective at all, because I believe that we need to take the person from where they are. And so I've just adopted this through to my coaching practice, in that I make sure that we're really working with the person and it's their unique experience, rather than some sort of, I've got a process, let's follow this process. We actually go with what's needed,
right?
And as you can probably tell, I love to be an innovative teaching person, and I like to create my own processes. So I use different ways of learning through VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic ideas, so that people can actually get it. I had one quite traumatized teenager who'd been adopted, and I ended up having to do a puppet show, because I knew that his attention span was maybe 10 seconds. And it was just getting very challenging to keep his attention. So when I could tell what I could sort of give him the concepts with puppets, he was like, oh, what are you doing next? What are you doing next? So it really
How old was he?
He was 17.
17.
Yeah, well, it was shocking to him. He was like, what are you doing? You've got a puppet. But I've always been that way. I will I know enough about the brain and how we learn and all these things to be able to adapt things to help whatever comes along, because lots of people are dyslexic, so giving them a bunch of stuff to read is not very fair. Let's look at how we can present work where we've got lovely pictures and images, and actually being able to move stuff and be kinesthetic. And when you can do all those three things, you're going to capture a far greater audience.
Right. Oh my gosh, Tania, it's been amazing. I can't believe it's already been an hour. It just kind of flew by, but that's how it is when I talk to you.
Yeah, well, I think we covered some good stuff. I think it's useful.
I think we did. Is there any last things you want to add?
Well, I would just say that I don't think, the tough stuff happens for all of us, as I just said in this interview. We can't avoid it, but we can minimize it by getting in touch with what our blocks are and the baggage. We can actually show the universe that we are listening. I don't need another reminder. Don't give me another challenge. And we can mitigate how we respond and how stressed we are by things by working with ourselves. So if any of the people who watch this would like to do a discovery session, we can look and see what's really going on and where the highest priorities are and how they can start making some shifts.
And find out what the source is.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tania. We will, I'm sure, have many, many more conversations, and I look forward to seeing some of your programs that come out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.